All right, well, as the last few people trail in, we'll just give another 30 seconds or so. Looks like we've got a pretty nice crowd, so that's wonderful. I appreciate everybody joining today. And in case you didn't hear it, we do have the recording going. So if you've got colleagues or friends that you want to share this with, or they're running late, we will have the recording and email it to everyone who registered, and we will also share the recording, in the deck on our YouTube channel in the next few days. Also, I know it's lunchtime, so please feel free to turn your camera off and mute yourself if you want to have lunch while you kind of enjoy the day. And we will have the chat is open if you have questions, and if you have something you want to interject along the way, feel free. I'm fine with that. And we will have a Q&A afterward. So there will be time. So the topic today is, the intersection of purpose, growth, and progress. And this topic really stems from our point of view that marketing has the power to accelerate growth and drive meaningful change in business and in people. And, recognizing that we don't all work for organizations that are, directly saving lives or purely mission driven. It's important that we recognize and connect the work we do with the good that results from it. And very often there's a lot more to that story than actually gets told. So, business is a very powerful force for good. But sometimes progress can be hard to see when the news comes at us from all these directions and tends to really focus on the worst of our society. But on a macro level, there's plenty of incredible progress in very important areas that are worth sort of noting. And, without, noting that without shortcomings, it is business that's undeniably a powerful force for making a lot of this happen. So I'm just going to pop through a few things. When you look at, global literacy rate from the 70s through 2000, we see a steady positive trend. Global access to clean water is a steady positive trend. Global life expectancy continues to rise, even with the challenges we've had in the last few years. And with all the, talk about the challenges of manufacturing in this country and recognizing there's been a lot of changes, I bet a lot of people are surprised to know that the trend for manufacturing in terms of the billions of dollars that we produce in this country has also been on a steady rise. And this will likely shift more aggressively as we reshore and continue to shore up supply chain and other things that have sort of been exposed in the last few years. And also there's a good story around how we're moving towards renewables. They made up 29% of electricity generation in 2020. And there's a lot of positive momentum there too. So, over the past decade, when we look at sort of all the changes in the leading voices of influence and global business, there's been sort of a more formalized focus on issues that really relate to sustainability, inclusivity, and purpose. And we feel this is a great thing. And as this broader concept comes together in the concept of sustainability, it's really both a reflection of and a reaction to the drivers that move global commerce, societal change, and really human progress. And, there's lots of research that people are doing to really understand what's happening. And one of the things that continues to surface is that this is really about what has always driven business. It's economic performance and growth. And the research does show that companies with more attention to these things perform better than their peers. You've got 56% of consumers that will switch brands to a brand that's more environmentally friendly. B2B buyers factor ESG in when making purchasing decisions, and it's even more pronounced when you look at the sort of emerging and younger decision makers. Companies that engage in these practices experience lower turnover, higher employee satisfaction, and then ultimately, the great equalizer is stock price for public companies, and stock price of companies that prioritize things that matter to humanity are also outperforming. So there is a good story here, and it's not just a humanity thing, it's a business thing. However, it's certainly not a straight path, right? It's not an easy path, and it can get politicized, and there's also just almost always a push and pull that goes along with change. So you have to be really thoughtful about navigating the risks and really aligning to the vision and values that are integral to your organization and that are championed by your CEO. So, as you kind of look to put some of these thoughts into place, you have to think about what actions does the company really practice before words. You have to be careful about greenwashing or misrepresenting. In today's world, transparency is probably more important than it's ever been. Of course, there's regulations. So, non-compliance or disregard for things that are sort of required is a risk, but also there's a risk of inaction. And that's one of the things that I think marketing needs to think about. And when we look at the, sort of the primary drivers that sort of are important to where growth meets progress, often it is positive intent in the C-suite as our leaders across business, think more about their impact and their opportunities. There's definitely a shift in mindset at the highest levels of business. Of course, regulation is always going to be there, and that's a double-edged sword because often it's clumsy and there's pushback against it, and the governments are slow. And then there's the threatening market forces, which are really employees and their reactions to how the company's behaving, and then customers and investors. So these sort of issues are becoming very, threatening to certain types of businesses. But then the other piece of it that is, I think, where marketing has the greatest voice and opportunity is in the positive market forces. How do we create competitive advantage by finding these intersections? And the truth is, every brand has a story about how they make their industry better, how they make their customers more effective. And very often this intersects with macro trends that are important to their brand and the world at large. So, it's a process of finding the authentic intersections between your brand and what's important to your customer. And really, that's always been a fundamental to marketing, right? It's always been about the unique value proposition that your brand offers. And when you can level this up to purpose, there's another layer of value and opportunity that is there for you. And in today's landscape with, owned, earned, and paid media, there are so many ways to deepen that story. It doesn't have to be your main message and where all of your spend is, whether it's your internal comms or your PR, social media, email, video. All of these things work together to build sort of the depth and narrative of your brand. And that's where you can really find opportunities to ladder up to higher purpose. And it really does matter when when we look at that, we think about how does marketing move people and why does it matter? Well, it matters because it does inspire better work. It makes work more fulfilling for the people that work for your organization and others. And truthfully, it's been driving progress in humanity and society for decades. So I'm going to share a few examples. And Coke was one of the early leaders in going forward with external messaging that was really about inclusivity. And so this is a more current iteration of a campaign that started a while back. And if there's anybody that wants to put a guess in the chat of when they came to market with their first sort of messaging around Coke being a unifier and inclusivity and things of that nature, I'll wait a second to see if anybody wants to guess. Come on, somebody guess. Oh, David, you're cheating. You know the answer. Julia? So there's a 2002, there's a 1980. So Coke really broke through with a campaign that got everybody in my generation singing a song, and it was 1971. And so it was actually an incredible commercial that got a lot of attention at the time, so much so that they remade it decades later. But this is, more than 52 years ago. And over that term, Coke has been, a top performing stock. And so they were an early sort of pioneer in recognizing where some of the opportunities can be with messaging that both drives growth and progress. In 2004, Dove kind of broke through and broke some boundaries and challenged conventional thinking with their Real Beauty campaign, and iterations of that have been, in market ever since and continue today. Procter & Gamble has taken a lot of different approaches to how they bring this type of messaging across the work that they do and the messages that they put out. And there's lots of them. Some of them are more provocative and challenging conventional wisdom more than others, but the impact is often unpredictable, right? Bud Light is the most recent example of this. It's a bold decision to challenge conventional thinking, and it's caused a lot of public backlash and support. And I'm not suggesting that all brands should feel pressure to be brave and bold, but what I am saying is that I appreciate how things like this widen the margins for other brands and stir dialogue that shapes societal perception. And there are countless more subtle ways that brands across the spectrum show purpose and voice to their values through their marketing decisions. Lots of recognizable brands have worked these types of messages into different areas of their communications. And B2B brands, when you look at industrial marketers, they can reach really deep into many geographies and different industries with products that have global impact. And this is a company we admire that really is involved in the mission of solving water around the globe. Siemens has always been a company that has prioritized both products and messaging around renewables and other really positive trends. And when you think about the impact that the largest brands can have on shaping perception, policy, and global business, it is really inspiring. You think about how Apple has sort of set this target to decarbonize their supply chain by 2030, and more than 200 of its major manufacturing partners have made commitments based on that. So it really becomes a something that maybe at one point in time was political, becomes very practical. So, you don't have to be political or controversial to bring more purpose to your brand story, because there's often more to your story already, and you just have to find ways to connect it to these macro trends and bring more humanity and richness to your stakeholders, and it will drive real business value. A few examples from clients we work with. We've got a client, Mazars, that's a global consulting firm that, among other things, consults specifically on helping companies make the right choice for both business and the world to be compliant and drive growth and progress. CNA is a global insurance provider that does a fantastic job with internal communications and opportunities for employees to engage with and be on teams and committees that they have passions for and identify with. Automate is a trade show that brings together innovations across literally every industry to drive all sorts of progress and efficiencies that move the world forward, from reduced pollution to workplace safety. And there's lots of exciting things coming with the technologies that are sort of emerging today. So there's going to be accelerated change as we look at the next decade going forward. This is another client that uses some of their social media to sort of just bring light to how they help save billions of gallons of water and money for their customers that are farmers. They're an agricultural irrigation company. So there's so many different ways that you can bring these ideas to the surface today. And when we think about how do we help our brands evolve, we look at how do we address the growth objectives first, right? It's always about how do we make sure that we're meeting the business objectives. But we do that keeping in mind that, moving people moves market share. And when you move human emotion, you move brand perception, you move customers down a path to purchase, and you move the world forward through innovation and progress. And it can really help, both bring a story to light and bring purpose to the work that we do. So, I'm going to wrap with some questions that, I think can help you maybe think about this a little bit differently and also practically. While the opportunities are different for every brand, I do believe that they are there for every brand, and that they start with sort of mission and vision, right? Is there a purpose in your company's written mission and vision already? And are you really leveraging that and thinking about how that can come to life? Secondly, how do your products directly or indirectly advance humanity? If you put a little thinking into this, you will probably find things that have some traction and some aspirational value that are really not often surfaced. Also, really understanding where your executives and your key stakeholders stand regarding a lot of these trends. And, stakeholders, I include everybody from, your sales channel to your customers, to your emerging leaders and employees across the organizations. But starting really with your executives, where do they stand on these issues and what do they think is important? And then that emerging leaders, I think, is really important, right? Looking at the emerging leaders in your organization and your customer organizations and understanding, what is important to them, their livelihoods, their future, their families. I also think it's really valuable to look at what brands in your market or adjacent markets are taking a stand. Is there anybody doing work that leads to higher purpose and that you feel is valuable within your business context? Similarly, which of your customers are involved in markets or doing things that make an important impact? There's lots of sort of case study opportunities and things to be learned from how people use the products that we all put forth. And quite often we can leverage those to their benefit and ours and the greater broader benefit as well. And then, of course, really looking at what are the risks to your company relating to these things, because they are different for different industries. There are companies that have the opportunity to be more bold, and others that are much more conservative. But within each of those organizations, all of those organizations, there are opportunities to sort of mitigate the risk and find higher purpose to the work in a way that really matters. So as we sort of move to a Q&A, I hope people have a few questions, but I'm going to also introduce Louise to join me in the discussion. She's our strategic planning director, and she's really on the front line of helping our sort of clients and teams here understand, refine, and connect the work that we do to sort of higher purpose in broader context. So welcome, Louise.
Great, thanks, Scott. So I was actually going to start off the questions. And I'm often asked, what's the best way to really understand what's going to resonate most with our customers and prospects? And in having a background in research, I would say there's many, many ways, and it's really weaving those questions that really get to what matters most into all of your conversations. You don't need to wait for a formal piece of research. I'll just give an example. The other day, we were having a briefing from a subject matter to write a white paper, and our opportunity as the agency was to punch up the story. And really what our client was meaning by punching up the story was, how do we make a human connection? How do we not just talk in a very technical way? And so we were having a briefing from the subject matter expert, And as soon as I asked the question, what is your superpower? Why are we doing this? He absolutely lit up. And it was those insights, that human connection that really laddered up to purpose, that we're now weaving around our story. So that was a very informal, that wasn't the kind of the reason for going into that kind of, it was a very technical understanding of the industry and the sector. It might just be a conversation, as Scott said, to many of the different stakeholders, whether it's internally talking to the sales team and asking them, why do you do what you do? What excites you? Or whether it's a more formal piece of research. We've just had a couple of brand trackers that were quite technical, but we made sure that we asked the question that got to our purpose that was in our brand. We made sure that we put that question in there to find out, how much it mattered. And absolutely coming out of that research, that was giving us the competitive advantage versus our competitors. It was telling a little bit of a deeper human connecting story. And it helped to legitimize. So it gave some power behind often those kind of softer storytelling pieces. It legitimized it as being a very powerful and key differentiator. So I just wanted to kind of help with the dialogue with Scott here and start those questions off.
Yeah, and one of the things that you said when we were talking about that first example, just about how the subject matter expert really lit up about, the excitement he had about the work that he does and the impact that it has more broadly, is that especially in complex industries, those are the stories that often don't get surfaced, right? So it's that probing and then that understanding that sort of brings those things to the fore and then becomes part of the brand narrative. Because often those types of stories focus more on trying to simplify and explain complex things that people know are important to sort of how they function and support their customers. But it's those passions that sort of connect it to a higher level. So I thought that was a good example.
Scott, I think a lot of times when this kind of stuff comes up for companies that aren't, the Microsofts and the Apples of the world, the question, becomes, okay, this is all great, but how do I prove this to my C-suite that it's going to be worth the investment? What's the sort of tangible, if they're less inclined to look at that sort of big picture in that way?
Well, I guess what I would say first is that that's one of the reasons the C-suite needs to be sort of involved in that sort of vision and mission, because if you bring these things forward in a way that really aligns with their mission and values, you have a much better chance to sort of get that buy-in. And of course, I think that looking at how we measure all the things that we do, whether it's the engagement with articles and videos and social posts, I think that you kind of look at how do you tie those things back to some of this messaging and sort of gauge market interest and reaction and response to the things that you find are important. And I sort of want to reiterate that it's not about coming up with the main campaign theme that is all about this. It's about deepening the story and finding ways to enrich and deepen those messages. So yeah, I mean, like with everything, measurement is imperfect, but it's certainly, I think there are ways to understand how you're connecting and landing with these types of messages. Louise, do you have anything to add on that? Because certainly they could come to life in a brand tracker or something else. But
yeah, and I was just going to say also, we often we're often working on very complex technical industries, and I think, Scott, we were saying before, yes, of course, we have to get the credibility across first, that we understand, the technical aspect and nature and have value proposition. But it's and then you can connect much deeper of, why does it matter? We all want to feel good about kind of making the choices that we make. And so, yes, you can make sure that you're tracking and getting all the measurements, whether it's on a brand tracker. We often talk qualitatively to people, whether it's stakeholder interviews, and we'll ask all the technical questions, but we also get to kind of, why does it matter? We often, my team knows I like to ask the question, what business are we really in? And that really ladders up to that human connection. And so from a qualitative, talking to your sales team, talking externally to your clients, you can very quickly get to a consensus on what matters most. We worked on a very technical financial services company, and they all had the kind of reason that they were in it was because they felt it was a noble industry and it drove progress. I would never have predicted that that was going to be the consensus and the insight and the human connection, but you can do it in informal ways. It doesn't have to be a big piece of research to make sure that you're kind of really hitting at the heart of the matter.
Yeah. And getting, just to tie that back to measurement, I think when you land on the messages that do resonate, you will find that you'll see higher engagement, and you'll be able to, anecdotally and statistically probably show some traction.
Louise, you talked a little bit about talking to, internal and your channel partners. What do you think is the best way to understand what your market really is going to react well to?
That's quite a big question, David. I would say, there are many different ways that we've done it, whether it is those informal kind of conversations with sales who have their kind of boots on the ground from the internal team, laddering up the whole way to kind of a brand track and finding out people's perceptions and kind of what's motivating them. Or it could be, as Scott mentioned, it's kind of testing, making sure that you're setting the KPIs originally of what you want to measure, whether it's digital campaign, and checking how that's working. But there are many ways. I don't think there's a golden bullet of kind of getting there. We tend to surround it in many different ways of getting to those KPIs, and finding out kind of what matters most to them.
Any other questions? Don't be shy.
Looks like we're getting pretty close to time anyway.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody. Oh, you know what? There is one other thing that came in here that I can speak to. That is the difference between how can companies take advantage of this trend if they have a very conservative customer base, and don't want to run the risk of alienating people. So I guess the thing that I would say there is, walk before you run. Like I said earlier, you don't need to be, exceedingly brave and bold to find really good opportunities to deepen your story and find higher purpose. And as Louise said, through some of the strategies of uncovering the research and the messaging, I think you can probably find the things that would be most likely to put people off. But you never, the good things can come from in surprising places. So as you watch different industries and different markets take bigger and bolder steps, you'll see the shift and the widening of the margins for all of us. But I really appreciate everybody joining us today. And if you have any questions, most of you know exactly how to reach us. Feel free to ping us, and we will get this thing up on our YouTube channel, along with a link to the deck in the next few days. But I hope you enjoyed the topic today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.